It's showtime.
Man, do I love this movie. I don't know what the hell happened to a lot of my generation, but I feel like so many of us got stuck with like only one or two VHS tapes in the house when we were growing up. Like for me, it was either Toy Story, Jurassic Park, or Beetlejuice. And Beetlejuice said the word fuck, so I watched it a lot. And there's a lot to talk about with Beetlejuice, but before I do, we gotta take a quick detour. So the other day I was walking around and a song came up on one of my playlists that I hadn't heard in a while. This one. It's a groove. It's a good one. Like you got the do's and all that. But it got me thinking about tone. Like if you've never heard this song before, like I really recommend you go check it out because I mean, it's a banger. But also, if you do, pay attention to the lyrics, because while this song sounds very happy-go-lucky, its subject matter is actually extremely fucking dark, like falling into a crystal meth addiction dark. So, and I ended up compiling a couple more songs that do the same thing, just for shits and giggles. Check this out. So, love doesn't exist, and you're dumb for believing in it. You also get this little moment right here. It's fun. All you other kids with the pumped up kicks, you better run, I'll run my gun. Yeah, so like school shooting, which is just, not exactly a happy subject matter. And then there's Electric Avenue, which, I mean, every time I hear it, I think of this. Down to Electric Avenue.
And then we'll take it higher.
Hey, Electric Avenue.
I know,
yeah.
Right? Hey, take that shit to the next level, eh?
Okay, I will.
And, I think it's pretty obvious that they chose this song because it sounds very reggae, and also the chorus says, and then we take it higher. As a surface level choice, it's perfect for a stoner comedy. Like, it is. I love the Pineapple Express. I'm really not trying to shit on this movie, but, now that I know that the song is about the Brixton riots, which happened when racial tensions turned violent in the UK in the 80s, it's kind of like, no, not the best choice, I guess. Like, not great. But then again, that's kind of the risk of creating a song that's super happy and catchy in tone when its subject matter is the opposite. In many ways, Outkast was right, and we don't want to listen, we just want to dance. So the message kind of gets lost in translation, or goes over everyone's heads, or what have you. Like, there's a clear difference between this...
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad.
And this...
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad.
And this... And this.
A beautiful bunch, a ripe banana.
Daylight come and we want go home.
How's that for a fucking segue? Ooh, aren't I so observant? The tone of Beetlejuice clashes against its subject matter. How insightful. It's not like it's legitimately one of the biggest draws of this movie. Like the exact reason why everyone loves it so much. Go ahead and subscribe now. You're welcome. But look, inevitably there are going to be people who don't really know what the hell I'm talking about. So before I gush over how well this movie does the whole tone thing and why it works, let's go over what tone is. So the simple definition of tone is just the overall feel or mood that a work of art, literature, film, whatever, embodies. Writing can be silly, like Beetlejuice, or it can be epic, like The Lord of the Rings. You can also use tone to explore similar subjects in different ways. To give an example, there's a huge difference between Schindler's List and Jojo Rabbit. The first is an extremely serious drama, while the other is more of a satirical comedy. But they both explore important facets of Nazism to great effect, and they can be very moving in their own ways. I personally like to think of tone as the general manner in which I'd like my audience to feel when they're reading my work. And when it comes to tone, or hell, when it comes to like 90% of writing, the most important thing is consistency. Tone is one of those things that can be notoriously difficult to get down because it's something that's made up of different elements. In the case of film, things like lighting, dialogue, and even framing all have an effect on tone. So making sure those things are consistent is super important. The best example I can think of for a movie getting this completely wrong is the original Justice League from 2017. For those that don't remember, Joss Whedon, who was the Avengers guy, was brought onto the project because film executives are idiots that don't understand their own movies or how they work or why they sell. Now, I'm not going to get into it. The gist, though, is that they saw the success of the Avengers and thought that their movie needed to be funny and lighthearted in order to sell well. So they brought the guy that made Avengers, Joss Whedon, told him to do his thing, and he had shit like this.
Oof. You're gorgeous and fierce and strong and I know we went to war with the Amazons, but that was before my time. Hey, you know what? I don't want to die.
To a movie that was meant to be like this.
Clark, no. This world needs you.
And they ended up with a complete tonal dumpster fire that lost them a bunch of money at the box office. And there's a lot to criticize about the Snyder Cut, but at the very least, it has a consistent tone, which is honestly one of the more important things that are necessary for a movie to work. If you want a more detailed exploration of this, check out Thomas Flight's video on it. It's good shit. Putting it down in the description. Anyways, now back to Beetlejuice, and a moment that I think is probably one of the best examples of tonal clash that this movie has to offer. Check it out.
I am alone. I am utterly alone.
First things first, let's talk subject matter, because as far as subject goes, this is pretty serious. I mean, Lydia is writing an actual suicide note right now. Like, she is extremely close to doing something truly horrible. She's talking about being completely alone. She's clearly suffering. I mean, she basically spends the entire movie searching for some sort of human connection, which neither of her parents are seemingly capable of giving her. To be honest, it's actually something that I think a lot of people might have experienced. I mean, loneliness is a huge issue for a lot of the general population, both during their teenage years and way into adulthood. But then this isn't presented with a serious tone. It's actually kind of funny. And what makes it funny is, well, a hyperbole. Because everything here is exaggerated to near absurdity. The opera music is ultra sad, and Lydia goes for full drama with her word choice by saying utterly and using plummeted instead of jumped, which she crosses out. And then there's this little moment where Winona Ryder's expression just goes into full-on disgust mode when she crumples up her first draft, like she hates it. It's hilarious. I mean, it's not like dying on the floor laughing funny. And I don't know. I personally don't think I've ever laughed out loud for most things in this movie, but it's still funny. Like, it's funny. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird. But anyways, this is the kind of tone that you can find all throughout this movie. Like, there's a great moment when the Maitlands are figuring out they're dead. Instead of being scared or sad about what happened, they're just kind of confused. And Adam reads the title of the handbook incorrectly.
Handbook for the recently diseased.
Deceased.
Deceased.
It's a stupid little joke, but it goes really well with the rest of the scene because, well, they're confused about what's happening, and the joke reflects that by making you laugh at their confusion. In a way, it's the exact opposite of the stupid lasso joke from Justice League, which happens right after they're talking about their plan for saving the world. In one, the tone is consistent. In the other, you're supposed to go from tense about an upcoming mission to laughing at something completely irrelevant. And I think character also has a lot to do with certain things seeming completely out of place. Like in Beetlejuice, a lot of the humor comes from the disparity between the characters and their situation. The Maitlands are entirely too nice to scare the Dietzes successfully, so any humor that comes out of those situations feels natural and deserved. Lydia's suicide moment works because so much of her character is surrounded by what a lot of people might consider to be overdramatic and hyperbolic, including her own stepmother.
My whole life is a dark room. One big, dark room.
So you were miserable in New York City, and now you're going to be miserable out here in the sticks.
Any of the jokes surrounding the Dietz's remodeling of the house reflects the fact that Charles just wants to chill out in his new place, while Delia's going crazy trying to be fashionable. And this is kind of what a lot of Marvel movies get wrong, in my opinion, and why so many people cringe at a lot of their jokes, because oftentimes characters who are supposed to be serious and who are in serious situations will often basically drop character for the sake of a punchline.
Yeah. Oh, something is definitely bleeding.
Like, I keep shitting on the lasso joke, but that's basically why it's so bad. Freaking what's-his-face is supposed to be all brewing and shit, and yet he's just not for like half a second. It's like if Morgan Freeman made some sausage dick joke during the what's in the box scene in Seven. Like, you'd be like, what?
What's in the fucking box?
So I think at this point I need to talk about choice in writing. And by choice, I mean literally every single decision that a writer makes throughout their process. See, I personally believe that the strongest works of writing out there all contain extremely deliberate choices. This might be kind of a stupid example, but for a while, I really hated the Mexico birthmark that Agatha has in the Grand Budapest Hotel. It honestly just read to me like quirkiness for quirkiness sake. Like just Wes Anderson going full Wes Anderson for no reason other than, I'm Wes Anderson. Which as far as deliberation and reasoning goes is kind of shallow. But then I really thought about how the movie is meant to be a story within a story within a story, and how often when stories get told in that way, details are generally altered and exaggerated. In this case, the real Agatha might have had a birthmark that kind of looked like Mexico, but us seeing it as a perfect geographic rendering just serves as a reminder that our narrator is supposed to be unreliable. So basically, it's just a very Wes Anderson way of alluding to one of the more important themes of the movie, and as such is a choice that earns its place and actually adds to the whole thing. And tone is supposed to be a very deliberate choice too. I think a good example of this is in Tarantino's Django.
I'm Dr. King Schultz, this is my horse Fritz.
The first half of the movie is almost comical. It's kind of like a buddy-buddy adventure. You got Django's deep blue outfit and the whole bags debacle with the KKK or whatever that was. It's really another example of tone clashing with subject matter. But in the case of Django, this happy-go-lucky tone shifts throughout the movie, especially once we meet Calvin Candy. See, there's a point to this shift. We're supposed to be following Dr. King Schultz's point of view, and as a European, he's not exactly privy to the true horrors of slavery. His point of view kind of mirrors our own. The difference is his is geographical, whereas ours is chronological. Or maybe both. I don't know where you live. So as Dr. Schultz is exposed to increasingly evil and horrible things, the tone shifts towards the serious, and the campy adventure from the beginning is soon forgotten. The effect, at least in theory, is that the audience basically experiences a similar emotional trajectory as our main character, starting with an almost innocent idea of slavery in our heads and ending up with a feeling of total disgust at the irrational hate we're presented with. So if tone is a choice, then what about Beetlejuice? What's the point here? Or at least, what's the reasoning? Well, I think for that, we have to look at what Beetlejuice really is at its core. And that, at least to me, is a subversion of horror and our expectations of horror and the Gothic. I think a good chunk of horror stems from a fear of the unknown. And I think that's why most of the scariest moments in the horror genre are often the lead-ups to the big monster reveal, not the monster itself. As a kind of extension of that, I think is death. It's the one thing we all have to do, and the one thing for which there are no answers beyond religious faith, and the one for which all our base animal instincts tell us to stay the hell away from. Most films, most cultures see death as a negative thing. It's something that's reflected in pretty much all media. Beetlejuice, however, has a totally different take on death. The movie's tone brings comedy and light to what might otherwise be an extremely sad and dark story. And this is all Burton. I mean, the guy has basically made a career out of creating a wholesome representation of the Gothic. You see it pretty much everywhere in his work. Like Beetlejuice subverting your typical haunted house story, or Edward Scissorhands basically doing the same thing with the evil monster trope. As far as I can tell, this love of the Gothic and the wish to, rebrand death comes from the guy's childhood when he grew up in Burbank surrounded by Mexican culture. Because honestly, Mexican culture kind of does the same thing he does, where its take on death is completely different. Think Dia de los Muertos and the movie Coco, which, by the way, I don't think would have ever been possible to make it had it not been for Burton basically paving the way and showing that movies about death and more heavy subject matter can absolutely be appealing to wider audiences. But anyways, back to Beetlejuice. The Maitlands find themselves tangled up in a hilariously inefficient bureaucratic system, and something that I find kind of funny, they never actually wish that they were alive at any point in the movie. Like, yeah, they don't exactly love their situation with the Dietzes at first, but at no point do they ever actually wish they weren't dead. They just want to scare these people away so that their home can stay the way they wanted it. They never say anything like, oh, how can we come back to life, or anything like that. They just accept what's happened to them and aren't ever shown as being upset about it. They're only ever, confused. Which, funnily enough, is another situation in which horror tropes are subverted. The Maitlands are ghosts, which most people would be terrified of. Unfortunately for them, the couple are entirely too sweet and wholesome to be scary. And any of their attempts to frighten the Dietzes away only end up having the opposite effect. And I've already talked about Lydia, but her fascination with death isn't out of some weird morbid place. It comes out of loneliness because, well, the only people she seems to have really connected with are the ghosts that are haunting her, and she desperately wants to join them. So really, this movie is trying to show you that people who enjoy horror and the gothic aren't really that far off from others who might be considered more quote-unquote normal. And the end of the movie, showing Lydia all happy about school and life in general, reflects that. And this is also something that can be seen in the actual music of the film itself too. Like, I think it's pretty general knowledge that a lot of horror heavily leans on music and sound in order to create tension and scariness. Usually, like, I don't know, like really high-pitched violins and stuff like that. Something along those lines. You know what I'm talking about. But this movie instead uses Harry Belafonte and Calypso music, which is just about the happiest shit anyone's ever heard, ever.
Jump in the line, rock your body on time. Okay, I believe you.
So I think the conclusion of all this is pretty self-evident. If what you want to accomplish is a subversion of horror tropes, what better way to do so is there than to add a whole lot of silliness to the equation? It's also a great way to allow your message to be heard by a far wider audience. Like, yeah, the songs I played at the beginning are all pretty rough subject matter-wise, but ultimately they carry a message that's wrapped in a package that's far more easily consumable. Things might go over people's heads, like in the case of Beetlejuice, the anti-suicide message is pretty well hidden behind the comedy, but it's still there. The movie also just kind of works as a gateway into appreciating other types of more serious and actually scary horror. I mean, maybe this is just me, but if you grew up watching a lot of Burton movies, odds are you also have an appreciation for the darker and more serious films that exist out there. I certainly do. But anyways, since this is a channel that's supposed to be about learning things when it comes to writing, I'll leave you with an overall conclusion that I think this movie ultimately proves, which is that tone can be anything that you want it to be as long as it's consistent. When it comes to writing and stories and genres, I honestly don't think there are any rules about what you can and cannot do. The only really important thing is to have consistency throughout your work, and to make deliberate choices with as much reasoning behind them as possible. So there you go. Thanks for watching, and go ahead and subscribe if you enjoyed this whole thing. Okay, go away.